Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is June 26. In today's daily Bible reading, we continue to read from the prophecies of Micah. You may recall that yesterday, as we began our study of Micah, that I mentioned that Micah's prophecy can be pretty well divided into three speeches or three discourses. We looked at the first of Micah's speeches in yesterday's video. But today we're going to look at the second speech that is presented in our reading for today. And as we read through this today, you'll notice that there are some great similarities if you remember back to the prophecies of Amos. Again, Micah and Amos are very similar to one another. Amos is making prophecies to the nations of Israel, while Micah is prophesying to the southern tribes in Judah. But nonetheless, their prophecies are very much the same. In today's reading, we begin with Micah rebuking the leaders. And he says this, "Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice, you who hate good and love evil? If there was any group of people who ought to know better, Micah says it is these leaders. They are the ones who ought to know what is just and right. They are the ones that ought to be setting the example. But instead, he describes them as those who hate good and love evil." That's how bad things had gotten. "Then they will cry out to the Lord," he writes, "but he will not answer them. At that time, he will hide his face from them because of the evil they have done." So a great rebuke against the leaders of the nation of Judah. Then he's going to move into a false prophet rebuke, and these words come from the Lord himself. "As for the prophets who lead my people astray, if one feeds them, they proclaim peace. If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him." In other words, this is like politics of old, very similar to politics today. These are people who decide what they're going to say based on basically what popular opinion might be. If you give them food, if you treat them nicely, they're going to give you a good prophecy. And if you ignore them, then they're going to say bad things are about to happen. These are false prophets. They will all cover their faces because there is no answer from God. God has nothing to do with these false prophets. By contrast, Micah is going to say he himself is a true prophet because he gets his message from God himself. Listen to Micah's words. "But as for me, I am filled with power with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, to Israel his sin." It's as though Micah is saying, you may not like what I have to say, but my words need to be heeded because they are coming from the Lord. These are not my words. These are the Lord's words. This is his message to you. Don't listen to false prophets who tell you exactly what you want to hear, but listen to the words of God himself. Listen to his prophet, Micah. Then he goes into the sins of the rulers. "Hear this, you leaders of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is right. Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they lean upon the Lord and say, 'Is not the Lord among us?' No disaster will come upon us." Again, more false prophecy. As long as you give them what they're wanting, they'll give you what you want, Micah proclaims. And he says, they know that you want to hear that everything is fine, that there is no disaster coming, and that's simply not true. They'll tell you that because that's what you want to hear, but it's simply not true. So then Micah turns to start to talk about the Messiah, as all of the prophets of God ultimately do. He begins to speak of the coming of the Messiah. "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, 'Let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. We will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Again, as we mentioned yesterday, Micah's book may be short, but it's filled with very specific prophecies and numerous prophecies that actually can be linked up later to actual historical events. Very accurate, very specific prophecies. Then Micah begins to write about the restoration of the remnant, quoting the Lord himself. In that day, declares the Lord, I will gather the lame, I will assemble the exiles, and those I have brought to grief. I will make the lame a remnant, these driven away by a strong nation. The Lord will rule over them in Mount Zion from that day and forever. Now listen to this. He's very, very specific once again. You will go to Babylon. There you will also be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hand of your enemies. So there's this promise of restoration, but Micah is very specific when he says, regardless of what the false prophets are telling you, Babylon is coming. Babylon will carry you into exile. But even though Babylon carries you into exile, God will not leave you. He will not forsake you. He will redeem you, and you will return to the mountain of the Lord here in Jerusalem. As Messiah is spoken about very specifically, now Micah gets even more specific. And you remember I mentioned in the introductory materials to Micah yesterday that Micah is the one who tells us exactly where Messiah will be born. And here's the passage. Marshal your troops, O city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be a ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Micah is prophesying the coming of a Messiah, and he will be born in a very small village by the name of Bethlehem. Of course, we know, because we know the story in hindsight, that that's exactly where the Christ child is later born. And then Micah closes this second speech by again quoting these powerful words from God, where God promises that he will destroy all paganism. Listen to his words. In that day, declares the Lord, I will destroy your horses from among you and demolish your chariots. I will destroy the cities of your land and tear down all your strongholds. I will destroy your witchcraft, and you will no longer cast spells. I will destroy your carved images and your sacred stones from among you. You will no longer bow down to the work of your hands. I will uproot from among you your Asherah poles and demolish your cities. I will take vengeance in anger and wrath upon the nations that have not obeyed me. We ought to get the picture, even today, that God takes sin very seriously. God takes sin like idolatry and immorality and formalized worship very, very seriously. He wants us to have a heart for him in the time of Micah as well as in today's time. And the question we must ask ourselves, do we have a heart that is in tune with God? Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.